Let's start with you and your violin. What drew you to that instrument originally?
Oh, that's a funny question. I started out very young playing the piano around when I was about 5, and I did not take to it. I kind of really didn't like practicing. I was not into it. After a couple of years, my mom finally allowed me to quit, but her a friend of hers was a fiddler and is a fiddler, and we went to one of her shows at some cafe at some point, and I just thought it was like just the coolest thing I'd ever seen. And so she let me, I must have been 9 or so, and so she let me touch the instrument after, and I begged my mom for maybe, I think it took about 6 months until she kind of really believed that I wanted to do it, and then I was allowed to take violin lessons.
So, as a parent of both a pianist and violinist, I can tell you that that's sometimes a difficult instrument to learn. The violin, tough on the player and those around them.
Oh, yeah.
What were those early days like for you as such a young person?
I mean, I think when you're a kid, it doesn't really bother you that much how bad you sound. You're just doing it, and you're doing all the motions, and like you're learning, and your teacher is giving you positive reinforcement, and so are the people around you. Even though, I mean, I think later on, I remember I must have been maybe 18 when I was about to go to conservatory for violin, and I remember my grandma telling me that she was just like, I remember back in the early days, I didn't think you were ever going to sound any good. So I appreciated her telling me, the truth. um, but yeah, because I think at first you don't really care, and then you start playing more. And I remember playing in my school orchestra, and really I loved how social it was. I loved being able to play with other kids, and so you kind of practiced. There's like a little bit of competition, but in all good fun. Just so you kept practicing, you got better, so that you could kind of play with everyone else. And I really enjoyed it.
How was it before you started to compose?
I started composing actually quite recently. I did a lot of, I've always improvised a lot, either on my own. I kind of used it as a tool for even just working on different techniques. But then more recently, probably in the past couple of years, I started composing
Mm.
for, I wrote a big piece for the duo that I play in andPlay, that we premiered this past spring. And that was kind of that. I mean, I've written now more pieces, and it's just been really exciting to actually figure out how to write down all the ideas, because I was like improvising and kind of had improvised sets that would uh, they were basically the same every time. They were basically composed, but they were just composed for me to play, so I could just write myself little notes, or it didn't have to be actually written out on the page so specifically. And I think that really helps the process, is to explain what you want from somebody else,
Mm.
so that they can create the sound that you want to hear, not just yourself.
Coming up in a conservatory, you would see up close the reverence that um, those in that kind of formal training have for the classics and the greats. But you're very focused on contemporary works. And so I'm wondering how you were drawn, why you were drawn to that, but also why is there, tell me if this is unfair, but why does it seem that there's such a stubbornness in classical music circles about the greats versus the newcomers?
Well, I feel like when I was growing up, we did both. I was encouraged a lot. My uncle is a composer and was a conductor when he was younger of contemporary music, and he was always encouraging of us to play, myself and my friends who also played music, that we played new pieces, that we composed ourselves, that we improvised, that we did stuff that was happening now, but while also playing all the stuff that had been written before by the greats, right? Like you said. And I think there's so much focus in conservatory, right, to play that older music, because you have to get good at it. It's so hard to actually play it so that it sounds really wonderful, that kind of people forget that you have to put that same amount of time and effort and care into the new works. And as we expand and get further and further away from Beethoven, there's so much more that we actually need to put that care into. And sometimes people, I don't know, it moves along kind of slowly, more slowly in the music world than in, say, the art world or something.
Well, yeah, fair comment. Was the distinction less significant for you? Did you just, having a family member that close to you so involved in contemporary music, did it just seem like a natural thing to you to listen to both new and old?
Yeah, definitely. It felt like they not only informed each other, but it informed my playing too, because we worked a lot on, I don't know, finding different timbres on my instrument. Just something like that was even kind of eye-opening when you're 15, 16 and you're learning to play ponticello, which is when you play the, like, with the bow close to the bridge and it makes a really metallic sound. That was not really allowed when you're playing like solo Bach. But actually, there's like a lot of crossover even in Baroque or Renaissance music where the players are much more open to timbral just shifts and interesting timbres on their instruments. And kind of now we explore that further, right? In contemporary music, there's just, so much that one can do on their instrument, especially, I mean, string instruments, I just think are pretty amazing. They can do so much that it would be sad not to explore it, right? I mean, if you can always you can make a beautiful tone on, in a scratch tone, just the same way that you can work on your beautiful tone for your Brahms concerto.
I think that that's underappreciated. Um, the, um, the complex nature of stringed instruments and what they can do in the hands of an accomplished player relative, for example, to electronics, which certainly you can do a lot of things with more and more these days.
For sure.
But you can't bend a note on a synth the way you can with a violin, can you?
It's a different experience, even when you listen to it, right? When it bends on a synth and when you hear, there's a physicality that you hear in the sound on a string instrument, or really on any instrument that's being played physically.
Yeah. There's a wonderful line in your bio that talks about blurring the lines between performers and composers. There's an obvious application of that idea to composers who have passed, but I'm curious your thinking on those who are still with us. Why do you feel that there's a boundary that needs to be blurred between composer and performer?
Well, I mean, this is happening so much now, and I love seeing it, is that there were so many composer performers in Bach's time, or just back in the 1800s. That's kind of what people did. If they composed, they were also performing. And so they had this closeness with their music. And we kind of forget that because now we are always detached from them. But I mean, I have close collaborators and friends who are composers and performers. And when we work together on their music or my music, I mean, we're able to talk about it in such an exciting way that why wouldn't you want to be both, to just constantly be in that dialogue with performing, playing your own music, playing other people's music, and talking to them about it. It's just, it seems like you're closing off doors that don't need to be closed.
You're in a somewhat unique position in having been interested in contemporary work from an early age. Um, how, in your opinion, has the music evolved over that time? Have you seen important shifts that we should be aware of? And where do you think the music's going?
Yeah, that's super interesting. I mean, I think that when I was younger, I was much more focused on, when you're learning about contemporary music, already the music of the modernists that was super exciting to me. Like you playing Berio and Boulez, that was just, it felt like an other world when you were playing, solo Bach and your Beethoven sonatas and everything. That felt really fun. And I remember the first time I played an Ives sonata, that just mixing the tunes like in with this kind of very complex piano playing, like that was really incredible. And then I feel like as as I have developed more, like with my playing and stuff, I've also started to just be really excited about, I want to call it noise, but I also feel like I want to be more specific, because even the music on my album, I would call some of it like there's noise elements in it, but when you hear it, it's not aggressive noise. It's just a different type. I feel like it's more air sounds, like air noise. And that, the mixing of noise and melody and just all the possibilities that our instruments have. I think so. There's kind of been this progression. I mean, I still love certain modernist music and Ives and all, everything. It's just that there's more, like, I feel like I've been able to get into smaller details
Mhm.
as
Mhm.
I progress, that I love to hang out with for a really long time.
And those are ideas that are not unique to what I would call contemporary classical music. A lot of what you're describing um, is showing up in contemporary electronic music. It's showing up in ambient music. It's certainly showing up in sound sculpture. I wonder how much you think about or are conscious of the broader question of contemporary music and your place in it, as opposed to more narrowly new classical music.
Well, I think we're all creating, I mean, we're all just out here creating art, right? And so it's like, and I feel like that it's blurring a little bit the lines where we're performing, or we're blurring that. It's becoming that these performances can happen in art spaces. They can really happen anywhere. And taking it out of the concert hall and taking it out of the feeling of, I don't know, a violin concert has to be kind of stuffy. And that's, we're not necessarily feeling that anymore, but it can feel kind of intimidating to go to a classical concert if you're not used to it. And when you see that actually you could go to a solo violin concert and it could just be like going to an installation, that you just hang out there with this installation piece for an hour, I don't know, then it instantly becomes more accessible in a certain way to a broader audience.
I think that's fair, and I think that your new album, your debut as a solo artist, has that real accessible feel to it. It struck me as from the very start incredibly listenable, if I can use that term. Um, well, let's start with the two composers that you chose. What led to those decisions, those choices?
So Christopher Svensson and I have been close collaborators since we met at a festival called the Bang on a Can Summer Festival in 2015. And they have written for my duo as well. And we worked together in other scenarios. And this piece is actually from 2017, and I premiered it then, and then kind of have been sitting with it for a while longer, because it's an incredibly complex piece, and also it's very physically challenging. There's so much that I can focus on. All of a sudden, it took me like 2 years to realize that, during certain passages, I was hearing something else that I wasn't playing, and I was realizing that it was because I was preparing different notes. And so you would hear these little sounds. So when you would be close miking it, you would hear just like different things happening, but it was actually just finger action. So, I mean, it's just been a very exciting piece to continue to grow with. And that's actually why I really wanted to record it, was because I had been sitting with it and working on it and just really loving it and loving the sound world for a long time, for what now feels like a long time. And Four Strings by Eva Maria Hubin is a similar thing, where I started working on it maybe in 2019. And it's this really beautiful piece with, I mean, it's just one page, right? And there are all these 7-note melodies, these lines, and then it ends where she gives you the note that you can either play an open string drone, or you can do a harmonic improvisation. And so and these harmonics are actually, it's quite a fun physical challenge as well, because she's using the really high partials on the instruments. And so it's like you'll be down here, and then you'll be there for you're only allowed to play each note the melody for one bow. So you play down here and then you move up here. And so, but it's like very calm, and it felt very centering. And so I was especially practicing it starting in March 20. I would start working it in 2019, and then March 2020 hit, and I kind of just practiced that for a while. That was what centered me. And so I knew that I had to record that one along with Christopher's piece.
Both just gorgeous recordings. You mentioned the close miking. Were they both recorded the same way?
Yes, they were both recorded the same way.
So what's the appeal of that from a performer's perspective? Because it is, as a listener, it's a fascinating thing to listen to, but it is still very unorthodox, isn't it?
Well, I think it's there are certain pockets of string recordings that are quite close, and we did have room mics as well. So there's a nice mix of the two, but I like the intimacy of having the close miking as well, because you really you hear the physicality of these pieces, even though, I mean, there are a couple of little noises that are taken out in Ava Maria's piece and also in Christopher's pieces where you hear some shifting around, and that's editing magic. But you still get to hear the actual physicality of me playing these pieces, and especially with that, they slowly unfurl. I think that's important.
Mm. It lends an intimacy to the work, doesn't it?
Exactly.
Mm. I'm interested too in both pieces. Silence plays a role. What were you going for there? I'm assuming that was very much a conscious decision. How does that inform your approach to performing both pieces? The desire to introduce silence into them.
So the two pieces actually use silence in really different ways in their scores. So in Christopher's score, every silence is written out. There are very precise measures and of rests. And so each one of those is very precise and paced. Christopher, they work on that a lot when in their own timing, in their work, in their practice, like when they're composing. And so it's a really fun way to work on it, because you definitely have to practice these rests. You have to practice the feeling. Some rests feel expectant, some feel more like you're in stasis. It's just, you have to work on how each rest feels. And then in Ava Maria's piece, she doesn't have any rests written, but tells you that there should be moments of silence. And so those, I am deciding how long or how short they should feel. And so also it's kind of a similar thing where I have to work on those and see how I sense them, but she's given those choices to me then.
For me, this is still, after years of using silence in composition, the most radical thing you can do as a composer or a performer. And I can tell you, as a radio broadcaster, it makes me so anxious that, as much as I love silence used in the ways that you're describing, if it goes on for 15 seconds or more, I'm on the edge of my seat, because I'm afraid people are going to tune out.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? It's visceral.
Yeah.
What's the power? Why is the power of silence so extraordinary in music? Why is it why does it have this impact on us?
It's interesting, right? Because it's so also dependent on us and how we're feeling as audience members. Because I've been in certain concerts where there've been, long silences, and I feel so at peace and taken along for their journey. I'm right there with them. And then there have been other times where you feel like you hear your stomach growling and you're so uncomfortable. And so even as a person who loves silence, I still have felt deep discomfort in concerts with a lot of silence. And I think, yeah, maybe I leaned into that because I remember, I still have memories of like hearing 433 for the first time, or really just hearing the music of, there's a composer at the school that I went to, Louis Nielsen, and he had silence in his piece. And I remember, or like then also very quiet music. And I remember just hearing that for the first time and being drawn to it, but then also it made me nervous. And performing it can be stressful because you can actually almost get nervous in the silences. Like it's these moments for you to get nervous all of a sudden.
Mm.
And so then that fascinated me. And that's why I'm drawn to the composers that I'm drawn to, I think.
Years ago, I saw Ryuichi Sakamoto in a solo piano performance here in Toronto. And the silence that he incorporated had the effect of confusing the audience. He was 3 pieces in before anybody clapped. This was an extraordinary thing to witness, that you had a full concert hall. There was not an empty seat in the place. A very polite Torontonians afraid to interrupt. And the result was that he just kept going.
Yeah, he's like, well, this is the opportunity.
Yeah, never seen anything like it. I'm curious about your interest in the descriptor minimalist. I noted on your Bandcamp page that that's not one of the categories that's listed, which surprised me. Do you think about minimalism? Do you make a conscious effort to create minimalist work or perform minimalist work, or am I reading too much into that?
No, I maybe that was an oversight. Who knows? I think minimalism, right? We think of it so often as being maybe like a Philip Glass or a Steve Reich, like that is a certain type of American minimalism. But really, it's such a broad term, right? Minimalist art isn't music that only has like repetitive things that happen over and over again. It can just be a white canvas. And so that's then more the John Cage, right? American minimalism, that is also could also be considered minimalism. And I mean, that's what I think is so beautiful about some of the music, is that with the silence, the things that they put onto the page then, right, are so important. Those are like the minimal things that they thought were so important. They needed to be said, because if not, we could just be silent together too. And that would be maybe a really beautiful experience. But instead, these melodies or these notes just had to be given.
It is that more current description of minimalism. You're quite right. It's stretched across multimedia and has become maybe one of the most important ideas of our time. Curious if you have any thoughts about why that is so resonant with people right now. Are we just craving peace?
I mean, I am. So I imagine that other people must be as well, right? We're in a pretty like maximalist society. There's a lot happening. We're constantly being bombarded with just news, pictures, videos constantly. So I think that when we can pare things down, and it doesn't have to necessarily be the like minimalism of like the 2010s, where there's kind of this idea of the man who had like a backpack worth of things, just like 50 items that he had in his apartment. Like not that kind of minimalism, maybe something more organic. Because I also think like minimalism can have, just like plant life, like having it feel like being in a forest can feel minimalistic, even though there's a lot of things happening. Just doesn't feel as loud as being on your Instagram or something.
Congratulations on your solo debut. It is a stunner. I think it's going to be a big hit for you. What comes next? What can we look forward to from you?
Well, first of all, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And I think what's coming next is I have some exciting things coming up with. I play in a quartet and with a duo. I play in my duo is called andPlay, and the quartet I play in is Mivos Quartet, and we just have like very exciting season of big new commissions, and um, I'm just really excited about all the music that we're working on. And then for me personally, I'm currently working on some new solo repertoire to do a solo album of my own stuff. So that's kind of my personal project that I'm working on as well.
Oh, wonderful. Thanks for this, Maya. It's a real pleasure to connect with you.
Yeah, thank you so much.